down in San Antonio. Apparently, according to local reports, local media, and there you can see the bullet hole right there in the window. It's up a couple of floors. It happened 3 a.m. Tuesday. We understand there were no injuries. The FBI is investigating, but this is another attack on an ICE facility. I believe it's the fourth in the last month.
No, you're right. I mean, last month, protesters blocked the entrance to an ICE national headquarters in D.C. In mid-July in Tacoma, Washington, a man hurled a Molotov cocktail at an ICE building. And July 12th in Aurora, Colorado, remember when the U.S. flag was taken down and the Mexican flag was put up and a Blue Lives Matter flag defaced. So this it appears to be an anti-ICE pattern.
Let's bring in Kevin McAleenan. He's the acting DHS secretary. Good morning to you, Kevin.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Good morning. Good to have you on. So the ICE agents down in San Antonio were saying this was not random. It was very targeted because that building that houses different offices, the bullet went through the ICE window, which looked like it was about 5 or 6 floors up. What do you think? What's your reaction?
Yeah, it does appear to be targeted. And again, as you just noted, this is the 4th incident of violence or an issue at an ICE facility. And our top priority is the safety of our men and women who are out there protecting American communities. Really appreciate the quick response of the FBI, the state and locals who are going to be investigating this. But we got to find this perpetrator, and we've got to ensure that this can't happen again.
Absolutely. The ICE field office director down there, Daniel Bible, Mr. McAleenan, said he blamed politicians, media outlets, and activist groups for recklessly sharing information and misinformation to the public. What do you think about that assessment?
I think the environment where we're demonizing law enforcement for doing their jobs, for enforcing the law on the books, is concerning. It can be dangerous, and it can result in people taking actions that are not supported by the facts, that are not in response to anything inappropriate that our men and women of ICE and enforcement removal operations are doing. And I think we've got to tone that down, absolutely.
Well, ICE certainly has been demonized. We've seen that a lot in the last year, really. But these guys, the men and women of ICE, are simply doing their job. If people don't like the laws, let's change the laws.
That's exactly right. We have to have a balanced enforcement process to have integrity in the immigration system. We can't do everything at the border, even though we're making progress with our international strategy, thanks to President Trump's engagement with Mexico, with Guatemala, and now the new president in El Salvador. Even though we're making progress, we still have to enforce the law in the interior. We can't have businesses that are exploiting undocumented workers in an anti-competitive fashion. We've got to have balance.
Immigration Enforcement Office in San Antonio earlier this morning. Now, federal officials say it was a targeted attack on the building. Fox chief breaking news correspondent Trace Gallagher has more on that. Trace.
Mark, the shooting happened overnight at an ICE facility in San Antonio. Nobody was hit by gunfire, but officials say there were employees working at the time and they were narrowly missed. And several windows were broken. The FBI says the location of the gunshots is no accident. Watch.
All of the shots that we have found are on the floors where ICE had offices. So this is no question a very targeted attack. It's not a secret facility. You can go online. It's a public, it's out there. So they did some research. They knew what floors ICE was on. They knew what buildings they were in, and they hit those.
One person was detained for questioning but released, and while investigators review surveillance video, there is ongoing concern over the potential for future attacks, with ICE saying, quote, political rhetoric and misinformation that various politicians, media outlets, and activist groups recklessly disseminate to the American people regarding the ICE mission only serve to further encourage these violent acts. This comes 1 month after a 68-year-old man with a rifle attacked a detention center operated by ICE in Tacoma, Washington, tossing incendiary devices at cars and trying to blow up a propane tank that ICE said could have resulted in the, quote, mass murder of staff and detainees. The man was shot and killed by responding officers and left behind a manifesto where he identified as Antifa and called detention centers concentration camps. Mark.
So the demonization of ICE seems to be having consequences. Thank you for that, Trace.
What's going on right now, while I tell you what we've just learned about this suspect, the Pierce County Medical Examiner has identified him as 69-year-old Willem Van Spronsen of Vashon Island. He has a criminal history that included assault on a police officer and violating a no-contact order for domestic violence. This evening, officers are serving warrants at his home on Vashon Island to collect evidence in this case. Now, there was a protest event outside here last night, and another was supposed to happen this afternoon. A few people who gathered out here believe he may have been at last night's event, but they're not sure why he would have come back here early this morning with a weapon. Tacoma police and federal investigators tried to sort out the violence that played out here in the early morning hours. Investigators say it started with a 911 call because someone was throwing devices over the fence to try and start a fire. When police arrived, they saw a man with a rifle and said he was carrying a satchel.
We don't know, if he just was trying to set a trap, for officers, if he was trying to hurt people in the building.
A car in the parking lot was torched, and investigators say the suspect threw flares at a propane tank, trying to make it explode. Ultimately, 4 officers opened fire, killing the man.
As Fox News reports, quote, police in Washington state say an armed man was shot and killed early Saturday after trying to attack a local immigration and customs enforcement detention center. The Seattle Times reported that the unidentified man appeared outside of the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma with a rifle and threw incendiary devices at both the facility and nearby propane tanks, at one point setting a vehicle on fire. Officers responded to the incident around 4 a.m. and called out to the man before shots were fired. It was not clear how many shots were fired or whether the man fired at police. Fox also reports that, quote, the 4 officers involved were placed on administrative leave in accordance with the department's policy. None of them were injured. ICE said in a statement that no employees were harmed nor involved in this tragic incident. The shooting took place hours after a rally in front of the detention center to protest planned mass deportation raids around the country. As the manifesto states, quote, in these days of fascist hooligans preying on vulnerable people on our streets in the name of the state or supported and defended by the state, in these days of highly profitable detention and concentration camps and a battle over the semantics, in these days of hopelessness, empty pursuit, and endless yearning, we are living in visible fascism ascendant. The attacker also wrote that, to my comrades, I regret that I will miss the rest of the revolution. Thank you for the honor of having been in your midst. My trans comrades have transformed me, solidifying my conviction that we will be guided to a dreamed of future by those most marginalized among us today. I am Antifa. I stand with comrades around the world who act from the love of life in every permutation. Comrades who understand that freedom means real freedom for all and a life worth living. As the Seattle Times reports, Deb Bartley, a friend of the attackers for about 20 years, described him as an anarchist and anti-fascist, and she believes his attack on the detention center was intended to provoke a fatal conflict. He was ready to end it, Bartley said. I think this was a suicide, but then he was able to kind of do it in a way that spoke to his political beliefs. I know he went down there knowing he was going to die.
Yo!
People protesting against the hateful bigots, the Nazis and Klansmen in Charlottesville, were peaceful, but not all of them. In their midst was a sometimes very violent group of protesters that call themselves Antifa, known to not only clash with bigots, but also sometimes with police and occasionally storefronts. At least 2 journalists in Virginia were assaulted by violent counter-protesters over the weekend, including this cameraman from the Richmond CBS affiliate. CNN's Sarah Ganem now takes us inside Antifa and shows us this group like you've never seen it before.
It's 6 a.m. in Portland, Oregon, and we're headed to a bar with blacked out windows.
They wanted to meet us really early in the morning because they're concerned about a lot of people being around.
We are meeting members of the Rose City Antifa, short for anti-fascist. This group's main goal is to disrupt neo-Nazis and white supremacists, but also take on government and capitalism.
Antifa is any group that's willing to stand up against fascists by any means necessary.
By any means necessary, they say, can mean outing a white nationalist at their work or to their neighbors. Or, as we've seen recently, violence, fires, property damage, hand-to-hand combat at protests across the country.
Explain to me the reasoning behind fighting.
You have to make it so unpalatable to be doing white supremacist organizing that they no longer want to do that. And historically, that's what's worked. You have to put your body in the way, and you have to make it speak in a language that they understand, and sometimes that is violence.
There's no firm number on how many Antifa activists there are in the U.S. because there isn't any one organization. Most are local groups that recruit and communicate through social media. But experts who track these organizations say their membership is growing in response to the rise of white national groups and the election of President Donald Trump. Violence and property destruction led to more than 200 arrests in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day. Prosecutors say they were wearing masks covered head to toe in black, a tactic the Antifa call black bloc.
People dress in black bloc for a few things. One,
Scott Crow has been leading anarchist and militant leftist groups for decades.
so people put on the masks so that we can all become anonymous. And then therefore we are able to move more freely and do what we need to do, whether it is illegal or not.
So some people will push back on that and say that the black bloc is to keep people from being identified and arrested when they break the law, when they commit crimes.
Damn right. It's a good way to avoid the ramifications of law enforcement.
We saw that firsthand at a May Day protest in New York City.
We cover our face because the Nazis will try to find out who we are. And that is a very bad thing because they harass people. When they organize, they kill people, they hurt people, they fight people. And we're the ones who are fighting back. They are the second coming of Hitler.
Police in Berkeley told us they haven't seen this kind of destruction since the 1960s. Law enforcement in other cities are dealing with similar situations, like in Portland, Oregon, where Antifa have been involved in at least 10 protests ending in violence, according to police. And it's wearing on the community.
It is new. It's like this rumble mentality of, I'm going to bring my friends, you bring your friends, and we're going to fight it out in the park. It's not something we've seen here. It's not good for the city. People are just frustrated by it. It's affecting their livability. It's affecting their business.
Has it become more violent?
It happens quicker. The fire starting that we saw on May Day is something we haven't really seen much of in the past. The running through the street, breaking windows and everything in sight. We haven't seen it as consistently as we've seen it in the last 8 months.
But it's the violence that's gotten them attention, directly confronting groups that preach white nationalist rhetoric, like on Inauguration Day, when white nationalist Richard Spencer was punched in the face. And it was the Antifa movement that caused Berkeley to cancel speeches by extreme right provocateurs like Milo Yiannopoulos.
If there are the more hardcore elements, the white supremacists and neo-Nazis that go to these rallies that are itching for a fight, we're there to say, we'll stand in your way.
The thing is, Jake, that experts who I've talked to say that the Antifa violence may end up actually hurting their cause. Across the country, people who are dressing in black bloc are getting arrested. Authorities are taking this seriously, but that's not stopping them at all. They have been telling me that they believe that this tactic is working. Now, one of the interesting things that I found in doing this reporting, what's really surprised me, is that we found that a lot of these new Antifa members, they're young people, disenfranchised young people who felt that they were let down by both parties after the election, and this is where they ended up.